Hey everyone, welcome to Redefining HR podcast. I'm your host, Lars Schmidt, and today I'm really excited to sit down with Michael Martocci. Michael is the founder and CEO of SwagUp, and we're going to cover his career. We're going to talk about what he's building, how he's catering to the HR community. But before we even get into that, it was interesting. I was a SwagUp customer before I met Michael, and I've been using SwagUp for swag for the Amplify Accelerator and the cohort programs that I've been hosting over the last year plus. And so when we first connected, I think it was probably on Twitter, and then we kind of got to talking about collaborating. And so we've now collaborated on swag as well. So I've got some kits that I've worked with Michael's team to develop for the Amplify community. So I'm excited to get those out in the wild after this episode. And excited to sit down with you, just learn more about what you're building, kind of what brought you here and what's next. So Michael, why don't you start with just an intro of yourself for the audience?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, we actually connected, I think maybe 3 years ago at the very first time, because I remember when you were launching, I don't know if you were launching Amplify or not, but you had this lightning bolt logo that was yellow and pink and blue. And I remember you wanted to put it on pins and some socks and stuff. And I don't know if we ever did an order or if it was just kind of some mock-ups, but I just remember that in the back of my mind, talking to you a long time ago. And then we finally made it really happen over the last year or so. But it's been a fun journey. But yeah, I mean, I was a lifelong kind of entrepreneurial kid. When I was 5 years old, I was the type of kid that was selling stuff to their neighbors and mowing their lawns and shoveling their snow to just try to make some money. I don't know. I didn't even have a need for the money, but I just kind of liked transacting and just the whole idea of commerce. And when I used to play video games growing up, it was more of the roller coaster tycoons and the lemonade tycoons where you're actually building businesses on the computer and stuff. So always had something going growing up, whether it was baseball cards or buying and selling things on eBay. It's just always kind of evolved. And then when I was 13, I actually ended up buying my first stock. It was Ford Motor Company, and that got me into buying and selling stocks a little bit growing up. And then I got really into finance, and I ended up going to school for finance at William & Mary in Virginia, so not too far from where you are.
Yeah.
And I got really into that community and into the business school early. And, I worked at a hedge fund when I was pretty young. So I was going to go down that path and do wealth management and all those types of things. But in the back of my mind and in my DNA, I was always much more of an entrepreneur and kind of a risk taker and somebody who would zig when others zag. And I found myself at college kind of settling in a little bit to the finance world. And then I kind of snapped out of it a little bit when my buddy from high school reached out and was like, hey, I want to start this app to find other kids on campus to, play basketball with or volleyball, et cetera. And I was like, I don't know how to code or anything, but screw it, let's do it. I had some money saved up from playing, from being a waiter at pizza places and stuff in high school. So we found a offshore development firm and started building it. And, in that process, we wanted to get custom flags up in dorm rooms and stuff to launch the app and promote it. And I was trying to find suppliers in the US to get these flags made, and they're $130, $140. And then I found suppliers in factories overseas for $7, $8. So at that time, I kind of learned a little bit about custom printing supply chain and started a little website to resell flags and banners from overseas factories online. And that was my first foray into swag in a way, and it kind of stumbled into learning a little bit more about it over time. And then I ended up dropping out of school. I was at a VC firm for a little bit, and then being around all these startups all the time, I kind of put two and two together, my background of understanding the swag supply chain with, seeing startups and seeing how much they care about brand and community and employee experience, and how swag, if done well, plays a big role in it. And, started SwagUp with basically kind of nothing, with some Wix website and Typeform, et cetera. And the rest was kind of history from there. So,
yeah. Well, you mentioned from the get-go, right? You've been involved and interested in entrepreneurial efforts even as a kid. Where does that come from for you? Did you pick that up from your parents? Was there a family element that kind of maybe got you hooked on seeing what you could build?
Yeah, there's some sort of DNA innate within me, because it was ever since I can remember, 4 years old, 5 years old, I was doing these types of things. I remember I used to have family come over, and I'd take the tissues in the house and then repurpose them into like to-go packages and then bring them downstairs and try to sell them to like people like, hey, would you pay 50 cents for like these to-go tissues? So, and one of my first like ideas was the butter stick. I wanted to take butter and make it into like a glue stick kind of and spread it on toast and like different stuff like that. And then I remember I used to be in the kitchen like a mad scientist making protein ice cream. So I would take, I was like, I got into working out a little bit earlier in my life, and then I wanted to make ice cream that was healthy, that had high protein. So I had like these little like experimental Tupperwares of like ice cream that I was making. So there's something in me that just, can't help it. Like I'm just always, creating things and trying to start businesses like that. But my dad's an entrepreneurial guy. So I mean, that's kind of where it comes from. I get two sides of the equation. I have my dad, who's the creative kind of risk taker, ambitious ones, has always been a self-starter. When he was like 18, 19, he was promoting, shows in like Brooklyn, New York, and New York City, like acts. Like he worked with Frank Sinatra when he was younger and went on tour with him a bit and stuff. So he was always kind of hustling. He was like a radio DJ for his college and stuff. And then on the other side, my mom is like this very analytical kind of like slow thinker, worked at Morgan Stanley for 30 years. So I get some of that finance kind of analytical mindset from her, and then the risk-taking ambition from my dad. And then actually my mom's dad was a scientist at NASA too. So I kind of have all these different kind of characteristics of creativity and ingenuity, but risk-taking that come from some sort of genetic makeup, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like the foundation was there based on that background and that family. When you kind of made the call, I know you've been doing entrepreneurial endeavors for most of your life. When did you know, like, you're kind of dabbling in flags and getting some exposure to the supply chain side there? Like, when did you have the idea for SwagUp? When did you know it was time to like shift and just fully commit to doing that?
Yeah, so like I said, in college, when I was about 18 or so is when I first kind of got introduced to custom promotional products and overseas manufacturing, et cetera. And then I left school, and the first thing I did after school was I was business partners with an NFL player. And some of the stuff we were doing together there was like online fitness training programs and stuff. And even with that, we're bundling, physical products with the digital products. So, shaker cups with, the company logo on them, or resistance bands or different fitness equipment. So I was still kind of flexing that muscle. So even before SwagUp started, like I had that ability to source and produce these items. And then when I was at the VC firm, like I was saying, you just see these startups, and every startup gets swag like very early in the journey. And then when they're trying to hire new employees, they really want to build this sense of camaraderie and connection. And when you talk to them, nobody does it the same way. It's like one of these really highly fragmented markets. There's 30,000 different like swag distributors out there. So, some people are buying it from like some local mom and pop shop. Some people are going to like one of the bigger e-commerce sites. Everybody has like a swag person. They just call them and they help them out. But there was really no kind of like streamlined technology enabled solution to make this process really simple from end to end. So as I was saying, like I just, while I was still at the VC firm at night, I would build out this website on Wix and, just kind of dragging and drop, making it look really good. And the whole idea was like, I want to make buying swag as simple as buying software, like make the UI and the design and the brand really kind of familiar to people, especially people at like high growth startups, versus, traditionally what you see from SwagUp is like some really old, ugly website that you got to kind of like call the number to learn more about it. And they just kind of list services. Or on the other side, you have like these bigger e-commerce brands that, again, like the e-commerce sites are pretty old and ugly, and they show you just way too much options. It's like, there's 500 water bottles, there's 2,000 notebooks. Like they kind of just push all the work on your side. And I was like, companies aren't looking to do this on their own. Like they're looking to get back to the things that they have to do on a daily basis. And swag is not like their main priority. So we need to take some of this work off their plate. So, very, very soon, like you got a website up there, put some Google ads, and very quickly, like legitimate companies started reaching out. So I stayed at the VC fund for maybe another month or so. I was only there for like 4 months and just went on this full time. But it wasn't, like there were some good companies reaching out, but the first few months were like 3,000 a month, 4,000 a month in revenue. Like it wasn't anything crazy. And, I was stupid at the time. I had maybe like 35, 40K saved up. And that started to dry out pretty quickly, especially because I got a WeWork in New York City for, I don't know, for no reason, like just to kind of legitimize the business in some
Right.
way. I think we were spending like $4,000 a month. So it was pretty stupid. But one of the first orders we ended up getting like 3, 4 months in was for these new hire packs, and a company wanted to put together 100 new hire kits for every new hire, a uniform assortment of things. And it just got me thinking like, wow, if we really focus in on that product offering and be the swag pack company and make that really simple, it'll be very clear to people like how we're different and distinct from every other company, and we'll be known as somebody that does this really well. And there's so many use cases because it's not just new hires, it's company milestones, work anniversaries, it's sending it to your partners. There's so many different ways you can leverage like a swag box, and nobody was making it simple. Like you'd have to do that yourself would require a lot of logistics and a lot of man hours to make it happen. So we just decided to double down on that as like the niche for us, and then it became this like mousetrap that allows us to attract and acquire a lot of customers at once.
Yeah, it's funny now that you mentioned that and you mentioned the lightning bolt. It was with HR Open Source, and actually now I distinctly remember it was a nonprofit that a friend and I had created, and we designed that lightning bolt, and we were going to some events and we wanted to create some swag, and I was going to some of those other vendors where it's like, you want swag? Like, here's a catalog, or like, here, you can buy
Yeah.
1,000 of these things. I'm like, I don't want 1,000 of these things, but I want to actually see it, before I'm gonna. And so I think that the way you kind of went tech first on the front end, and made it really easy to kind of go in and either, select, kind of pre-arranged and pre-configured kits or design your own, I think was smart. And I think actually looking back, I think I did end up getting some of them from you that we took to an event in Vegas. So I think you're right. I think that may have actually been the first time we connected. When you think about, you kind of talked about what swag is, right? And I think you kind of mentioned before promotional material, and yes, it can be that. And I think in a traditional sense, a lot of organizations may look at swag in that way. But I think from an HR perspective, we tend to look at swag differently, in terms of like whether it's onboarding, whether it's employee celebrations or milestones, whether it's a rebrand or a relaunch, and we want to get people excited about. There's a connective element, I think, to swag when done thoughtfully and right in that sense. And I'm curious, like when you have a range of customers, I'm sure some are in HR, others are in different disciplines, but how do you see your customers on the HR side kind of thinking about or using the swag?
Yeah, I think to your point, like when done right, swag is a huge bonding agent to bring people together and connect. And even since the beginning, I've never really been a fan of giveaways and promo items as much. The stuff that you typically see at conferences where, hey, like let's put our logo on something cheap and just throw it out and give it to everybody and hopefully that they care enough about the brand. Like to me, swag starts with, okay, is there some sort of already innate connection between the company and this third party, whether it's a customer, an employee, a partner, et cetera? Then swag can then be leveraged to really create a deeper sense of connection and bring those people closer together versus like randomly hoping that it's going to help, drive affinity for a company. So, we focused in on HR use cases early on, specifically for that reason to say, hey, like we actually truly believe that when swag's done well, it's a really powerful tool for HR and people engagement and these types of use cases, specifically with new hire. Like that really became kind of our calling card, is like being the company that all HR teams are going to help with new hire swag programs. And the reason why, that I saw this kind of happening is, as I was telling you a little bit before, is, in the past, if you go 20, 30 years ago, the balance of power was in the company's hand. It's like, IBM, it's Google, it's like a couple big companies were like, oh, like if I get a job at Xerox, like I'm super lucky. Like I hope I can work at a company like that. And same thing from a customer standpoint, like you didn't have as many options to choose from where to buy. And now today it's totally shifted where if you're a great engineer, you literally have 1,000 cool companies that you can work at. If you're a customer looking for a project management software, you have 50 different that you can choose from. So there's at this point, there's a much deeper sense of connection and bond between the companies that you choose to work for or to buy from. And it's typically tied to like who are the other types of people there? What's their value system? Like, what's the mission that they're on? Does that really resonate with me? Is this something I want to like get behind for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years? And in that sense, people just care a lot more about the place they work. And then in that sense, swag becomes this point of pride and connection for them, in the same way that if you it's the same thing as like going to Harvard. Let's say you get accepted into Harvard. The first thing you're doing is going to the bookstore to get the sweatshirt, because you want to feel I'm now part of this community, and I care so much about it. I want everyone to know as well that I'm part of this community. And you go out to a bar in Boston that night and somebody else from Harvard sees you, you're instantly connected in that sense. And that's kind of the culture that I think, and the level of connection that companies hope that they can achieve, where everybody in that ecosystem equally cares enough about that company where the swag can bring them together. But you have to do it well. It's got to be high quality stuff that people actually want, designed well. Maybe it's not so in your face from a design standpoint. Maybe it's something that's subtle that people really, who are in it, they know. Like, it doesn't have to be so apparent. So I think it hinges more on like the corporate gifting side, if anything, than like the promo market, where it's more on like the giveaway side. So it's more like a gifting tool, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, you've been growing tremendously over the last couple of years. And I want to talk to you about that, and particularly the people side of that. But before we get there, like, one of the things that I think also makes your growth story unique, especially this day and age, is that you're bootstrapped. Why was that important to you? Like, I'm sure you've had in this market lots of VCs reaching out, looking to give you money. Why was it important to you to keep things bootstrapped and scale that way?
Well, I think first off, it started out where it wasn't even an option to raise money. If you go back to the genesis of the company, it was like, let's see if there's something there. Let's get a website up there. Let's see if customers care. It was just kind of this iterative snowballing effect of like, let's see if there's a business to be had there. And then things just started to happen very quickly. Like, once we focused in on like the swag pack concept, it was like, okay, 30,000 that month, and then 60,000, then 100,000, then 500,000. So things started to evolve very quickly. So we were just trying to keep up with demand at the time. And we weren't thinking about like, oh, we need more money, we have to raise money for X, Y, and Z. And there's also some favorable like dynamics within the business that allow you to bootstrap more easily. For example, we don't have to prepay for inventory. So if we were like a typical e-commerce company, you have to float capital to like have inventory to then sell. Whereas in this world, since everything's custom made, we're procuring and manufacturing to order. So we're getting paid typically from our customers and then paying out our vendors afterwards. So that allows you to kind of not need a ton of capital to start. And then the fact that we have a network of suppliers that have a lot of the manufacturing capabilities and the machinery, we didn't have to make big investments in those assets up front to be able to build a business. And then by like year 2 and year 3, where it's pretty obvious that there's a legitimate business here and there's a bigger opportunity, then it was kind of a matter of like, well, we're pretty profitable, we're on a good path, and there's also an element of just, you have this pride of like, well, we got through the hard part without raising. Like, why do it now, and why bring new people in, and why add variables? And I think we all just like really liked working with each other, and didn't want to mess that up by introducing kind of third parties to the equation and have a new person to answer to. Like, when you're bootstrapped and you're profitable and you have a diverse customer set, you're almost in this really advantageous position where you don't answer to anybody. Like, you can just kind of do whatever you want, build the business the way that you want. Not that you want to like lose customers, but if you lose a customer, it's not the end of the world, because you have a lot of other ones. So there's just like this immense amount of flexibility. Now, more recently, as we've really scaled pretty legitimately, we have like about 200 people on the team. Then there's some serious constraints that capital can play in terms of like, which path do you go down? Where do you invest in the future? We have a pretty ambitious vision. So I think, we're much more open to bringing capital on at this point. And to your point, plenty of, VCs and private equity funds have reached out along the way. And then more recently, especially now too. So I think it's just different stages. I think at first it didn't really make sense. And then the second stage is like, we're very prideful. We can do it ourselves. We don't really need them. Like, let's stay independent. And then the third, it's like, wait, like, there's actually a really big opportunity here. And if we build the right team and we have the capital, we can capitalize on it. And I think that's kind of where we are now.
Yeah. So, you mentioned you're just over 200 employees now. How do you think about like intentionally, like obviously you're very focused on growing the business, but in parallel to that, there's always a bit of alchemy and a bit of intention, and also kind of scaling and evolving the culture as you grow. And how do you think about that? And like, even more specifically, like your role as CEO in shaping and evolving the culture of the organization as you grow.
Yeah, I think as a young entrepreneur, like when I started the company, I was like 22 years old, and it was the first like legitimate company that I had built. And now I'm 27, but I think the biggest mistake that I made early on was not realizing how important people and the culture and the values were, and being clear about all those things, because it sets the foundation for everything to come. It sets the foundation for how you make decisions, who you let in, who you don't let stay, the types of mentality and decisions that people make on a daily basis. So I think I was very much like, oh, let's build the business, let's build the product. That's what matters. But at the end of the day, companies are just a group of people. Like, if you don't have the right people and the right culture, you can't build the business and you can't build the product. And I think we made a lot of mistakes early on by either neglecting that part of it, or not getting the right people, or just assuming that like you don't need to really spend a lot of time to be deliberate about those things. And I also think early on when you're bootstrapping, one of the propensities that I had, that I think a lot of young founders or bootstrap companies have, is just, let's just hire anybody, like whoever is willing to join. Like, we just need all hands on deck. Like, let's make some hires. And also made a lot of like middle level hires. Like we were like, oh, well, we don't have the capital to bring on great people. And I think that was one of the bigger mistakes, is looking back, I'd much rather have 3, 4, 5, 6 really strong people and then build a foundation around them, than being like, oh, well, we can't afford to have great talent. Like, let's just hire some more junior people for everything. Because if you have a bunch of junior people in a really startup-y, scrappy environment that you can't provide a lot of structure and guidance and direction, you're setting them up for failure, and you're also setting the company up for failure as well. So, I think the philosophy on how we hire has changed a lot, and just being also just a lot more deliberate upfront about making sure we're spending the time to be deliberate about who we're hiring, what are we looking for, what are the characteristics, and then generally speaking, my overall philosophy is try to identify what are the 3, 4, 5, 6 key pillars in the business, or the things that really matter the most, and make sure they have a strong owner, and start from that as the foundation, and then work your way around it. Because I think, let's say you say warehousing and fulfillment is so important for SwagUp, then somebody really strong needs to own that. And that's the priority, is like, find that person. Because once you have trust with them, like, trust is the speed and oxygen within a company. Once you give them the trust, then you can, just give them the power to build the organization as if they're like the kind of CEO of that group within the company. And I've moved much more to that versus kind of me having oversight into everything. And the time period where we made the most progress and moved the fastest was the time when I was most removed from day-to-day decision making and tactical kind of movements. And it's more about empowering people. And there was almost an element of laziness. Like, at a certain point, I'd worked so hard for the first 3 years. It was just like, I couldn't get to everything. And I was just like, all right, you just do it. And, if you don't do it as well as me, whatever, it's fine. And you start to realize that people are actually really talented, especially if they're, specialized in certain areas of the business that you don't know as well. And so once I realized that if you empower people and give them the right information and you have the right people, that's where you really get leverage. I've started to become much more of a kind of a delegating type leader of, hey, let me set the direction and the tone for the business and help get people on block, but let's empower people to make decisions. So that's been the biggest evolution for me, just in terms of like, architecting the team, how we think about talent, and it's the most, in my opinion, is the most important thing when building a business.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, this moment of time, particularly that we're in now, and this isn't necessarily novel, but I think when you look at the society kind of more broadly, and some of the macro events that are happening around the world, from Ukraine to the pandemic to Black Lives Matter and social justice, there's a range of kind of socio and political things that have been happening that are impacting not just society, but workplaces as well. And I think as companies have navigated all these waters, the relationship between the CEO and the chief people officer, head of people, CHRO, whatever the title might be, has been, the importance of that relationship has been magnified because they tend to be working so closely together as they're navigating the company through all of these events. And how do you think about like when you're partnering with your HR lead, like what does that relationship mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, first off, we waited too long to bring somebody into that role. We just hired a chief people officer about 4 months ago, 3, 4 months ago. And, to your point, we talk a lot, 4 times, 5 times a week around lots of different topics. Because, I see her as really helping me spearhead, like, what is the culture we're trying to build? How do we align our people to become our most important resource and asset? And how do we make sure we have the right types of people here? How do we work through, as you're saying, there's a lot of tricky kind of situations to navigate within corporate environments today, whether internally or externally, and what's the best way to work through those. So, I think it's been really important for me to have somebody there that has a lot of experience, that's gone through a lot of different kind of ups and downs at different companies and has had to react and navigate different scenarios, because that's definitely wasn't one of my strong points. So I lean on her a lot for guidance of how to navigate these things. What should I be saying to the company? How should we be thinking about, driving performance within the company? How do we build a work environment where people can be, fulfilled and also be as impactful as possible? How do you navigate both being a high performance organization, but being an empathetic organization? So it's, to your point, I think that role is getting more and more kind of power within a company in a way. Like it's, the seat, they deserve a seat at the table when it comes to like being an executive, like on the staff in all the core meetings, because everything we're doing, strategic initiatives, building the product, it all starts with people and what's your strategy there. And looking back 5 years ago, I would have never said, SwagUp can't be successful without a chief people officer. We need a chief people officer at the table for all these, big strategic decisions. And now I think there's no way that we would go back to not having something like that. So it's a very tight relationship, and she reports directly to me, and we're pretty close together.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I know you're also going to be a dad later this year, and so congrats on that. But also, how do you I've 2 young girls, and my my wife was pregnant with our first child when I left corporate to start my own company as an entrepreneur. And I remember that even in that moment of time, beginning to think about how I would approach the balance of being an entrepreneur and running a business and being a father. And are you having those moments now? Are you beginning to be able to kind of, envision your life as a dad and as an entrepreneur? And how do you think about balancing those things?
I think, to be honest, it hasn't fully hit me yet of what the next steps are, or practically speaking, what's going to happen. I'm always kind of focused on okay, what's the playing field in front of me? What are the next, month, 2 months, 3 months that we can actually to execute on? So, obviously, I can see the future and see to a degree, what that's been like, but I honestly don't think that I've given it enough, thought to really understand what's the reality that's about to set in. I've been talking to a lot of other founders too, and seeing what do they do? What are some of their tips? How do they balance it? The hard part for us too is that Helen is also in the company, so we're both building this company together and having a kid. So sometimes it's the mom or the dad, could take some more time off, or one can stay at home for a while, and we're both very deeply involved in the business. So I think that adds an interesting dynamic to everything. I think, candidly speaking, we need some sort of night nurse or a family member to kind of help us out, because I want to be able to spend a lot of time, but a lot of productive time during the day together with the baby, versus being up until 6 a.m, dealing with some of those kind of complexities. But I think it's one of those things that's just going to be rolling with the punches when it happens, versus kind of trying to over prepare, because I don't know if you can really fully prepare for what's going to happen.
Speaking from experience, you can't. It's just gonna you have to kind of roll with that as it comes, because even if you have a plan, the reality may not at all align with that. So
what's the Mike Tyson quote? It's everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Exactly. I think that's kind of.
Yeah, that's about right. I mean, and I think also your first kid, everything is absolutely new. and a little terrifying, right? Because it's just,
Yeah.
you've never experienced anything like that before. But you get a handle on it, and it's interesting. I did the same as you. Like, I talked to a lot of fellow entrepreneurs and founders, and just like what that experience was like, for them. And I think it's, ultimately you find that balance. It doesn't happen right away, and it's not a linear path to that balance. But when you do, it's super fulfilling. So yeah, I'm excited for both you and Helen.
And I'm super excited too that a lot of my friends and other founders are having kids around this time, because to me it was really important to have like friends and they can all grow up together and kind of have this community out of the gate. So I'm excited for that as well.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I appreciate you kind of giving us all a deeper overview and insight into SwagUp and kind of what you're building and where you're going. We wrap up every episode with a lightning round just to help the audience get to know you a little bit better, man. So you ready to jump in?
I guess so. Let's do it.
Yeah. You don't have a choice, really. I don't even know why I asked you if you're ready, because like we're going.
You like lightning bolts and lightning rounds.
You're seeing a recurring theme here. So we're gonna start off with music. I'm checking out your Spotify playlist. Who will I learn are some of your top 3 artists?
It's great. I mean, I love hip hop. I love Travis Scott. I love Kanye West. I like Frank Ocean. So, but at the same time, it's a pretty diverse set. I like Frank Sinatra and some of that kind of like classical and jazz type music. So it's pretty diverse, but hip hop's like the go-to, especially at the gym.
Yeah. What was your latest binge on TV?
Latest binge. Well, we just watched the Kanye West documentary, actually. There was the 3-part series, so we watched that over a course of 2 days. So I'd say that. And then before that, it was catching up on Billions. I've never really been a big like TV person, so I still have a lot to catch up on. If, maybe some time with the baby, I'll be able to watch some of this stuff. But Billions was the next one that I actually like dove deep into.
Who is a business leader who you admire and why?
I think I always like to say Richard Branson, and I'm fortunate enough that I had a chance to like actually spend some time with him and meet him at one point. But I think he has this really incredible balance of just like being a really awesome business person, taking big risks, doing things that people think are impossible or crazy, but at the same time just like enjoying his life, enjoying his time with his family, doing things that he's happy and passionate and having a good time with. So. And also he's in great shape. He's like 80, 82, 83 years old. The guy's like ripped up. So I aspire to be someone like him that goes after things that are really ambitious, like achieving his dreams, but also at the same time being super fulfilled and balancing with his life and staying healthy. So.
Cool. Yeah, he's an amazing role model for I think anybody in business, but also in life. He seizes it. So.
Yeah.
Last question for you. If you, I know you've been an entrepreneur a couple of times over, so I'm actually going to push you into another career path. You can't be another founder or entrepreneur. You have to do something different. What would it be?
Yeah. I don't know. I've kind of realized over time that I'm probably not the greatest employee. And I think most founders would kind of say that. But I'm a very analytical person. Like I love spending time in like spreadsheets and analyzing numbers and data and statistics. And I actually like I'll spend a weekend just doing that stuff out of fun because I actually really like to do it. So something with like mathematics and statistics, or I spent some time in a hedge fund, so some of that like investment analysis type stuff. It sounds a little nerdy and boring. Like I liked investment analysts, like in the public markets, they'll analyze stocks and they'll write reports and they have their models. And I like writing as well. So I probably wouldn't mind being like a stock analyst or something.
All right, Michael, I really appreciate you taking time to come on the podcast, share your journey and what you're building. And wishing you all the best.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on.